You don't have to raise your voice to raise the standard. You don't have to be seen to make a difference. Because real influence, the kind that lasts, often moves in silence. The world is noisy. Everywhere you turn, someone's talking, selling, shouting, performing, trying to be heard above the crowd. We live in an age where the volume seems to define the value. The louder someone speaks, the more people assume they must know something worth hearing. But I've learned that noise and wisdom rarely travel together. Some of the most powerful people I've ever met were not the ones who spoke the most. They were the ones who spoke with meaning. They carried a quiet authority. You didn't notice them enter the room, but somehow, when they left, you felt their presence still lingering. They didn't demand attention. Attention simply followed them. That's the essence of what I call silent influence. It's the ability to move others not with the noise of your words, but with the weight of your example. It's leadership that doesn't shout, but still shapes lives. It's the steady hand in the storm, the calm voice in the chaos, the unshakable presence that reminds people what truly matters. For the introvert, the quiet one, the thinker in the corner. This message is for you. You don't have to become someone else to lead. You don't have to change your nature to create impact. The strength of your leadership lies not in imitation, but in authenticity. See, extroverts inspire through energy. They light fires. Introverts, they sustain them. They build systems, trust, and direction. The world needs both. But in times of uncertainty, the world looks for the steady hand. The one that doesn't panic, doesn't shout, doesn't crumble. That's where you, the quiet leader, rise. It's true. The world often underestimates quiet strength because it can't be seen on a stage or heard through a megaphone. But quiet strength is the foundation on which all noise stands. Without it, the show falls apart. So in this journey, we'll uncover 3 timeless principles, what I call the 3 pillars of silent influence. Each one reveals how introverts lead, not by overpowering others, but by mastering themselves. Because leadership doesn't begin with command, it begins with character. Let's explore how you can move the world, even when you move quietly. One of the greatest lessons I ever learned about leadership is that power doesn't always announce itself. Real power walks quietly. It doesn't need to convince anyone. It simply is. And for the introvert, this truth is a gift. You see, the world often mistakes noise for strength, but the two are not the same. Strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, and yet the whole room listens. There's a quiet kind of authority that doesn't come from titles or loud speeches. It comes from composure. It's the ability to stay calm when others are losing control, to think clearly when the world around you is in chaos. That composure is what sets the quiet leader apart. Because when you can hold your ground without raising your voice, people instinctively trust you. They sense stability. And in times of confusion, stability becomes magnetic. People are not drawn to those who make the most noise. They're drawn to those who make the most sense. And sense, real, clear, grounded thinking, comes from stillness. It's hard to lead others when your mind is constantly racing. It's hard to inspire when your emotions are always erupting. But when you've learned to master the art of inner calm, you become a lighthouse in the storm, guiding others, not by shouting directions, but by standing firm. Let me tell you something. Leadership is not tested when things are easy. Anyone can appear confident when the sun is shining. The real test of leadership is in the storm. When the pressure builds, when the noise gets loud, when emotions rise, that's when composure becomes your greatest weapon. Because in the middle of chaos, calmness communicates confidence, and confidence is contagious. The quiet leader understands this. They don't waste energy trying to dominate a room. They don't interrupt others just to be heard. They observe. They absorb. They respond with precision. When they finally speak, people listen, not because they shout, but because their words carry the weight of thought. And that's the difference between reaction and reflection. The world reacts. Introverts reflect. The world talks. Introverts think. The world rushes. Introverts wait. And in that waiting, in that stillness, something powerful happens, clarity forms. Clarity is a rare gift. Most people move through life reacting to whatever happens next. But the quiet leader moves with purpose, not impulse. That's why their words matter and their actions endure. People don't just follow them, they trust them. You see, composure is not about being emotionless. It's about being emotionally intelligent. It's knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. It's understanding that silence, when used wisely, can be more persuasive than speech. Because silence gives others space to think, to feel, to listen. I once heard someone say, when you raise your voice, you lower your influence. And it's true. The louder you try to prove your power, the less powerful you appear. Real influence isn't in volume, it's in value. It's in the steadiness of your tone, the calmness of your presence, and the consistency of your character. Think about the leaders you respect the most. Chances are, they're not the ones who spoke endlessly, but the ones who spoke with conviction. They didn't need to dominate the room, they simply anchored it. Their calm became the compass for others. Their composure became the model everyone aspired to. In the workplace, in the home, in the world, people are searching for leaders who don't panic when things go wrong. They're searching for leaders who can hold steady, who can be patient, who can listen. Because in a noisy world, calm leadership feels like oxygen. Introverts naturally carry this strength, the ability to pause before reacting, to think before speaking, to process before deciding. Don't see that as hesitation. See it as wisdom. The pause between stimulus and response is where greatness is born. It's where your leadership matures. If you want to lead effectively, master that space. Learn to breathe when others rush. Learn to think when others speak. Learn to stay centered when others scatter. Because leadership doesn't require noise, it requires nerve. And here's something I've discovered: calmness is not a gift you're born with, it's a discipline you practice. You train yourself to stay composed by embracing discomfort instead of avoiding it. You practice silence, reflection, patience. You watch how emotions rise, and you learn to master them rather than be mastered by them. That's how quiet leaders are made. Not overnight, but through the daily discipline of inner order. Because remember this, the world doesn't follow the loudest voice. It follows the most stable one. When you remain composed in pressure, people begin to rely on you. They seek your counsel. They trust your judgment. And slowly, without forcing it, you begin to influence the world. Quietly, steadily, deeply. So, if you ever doubt your ability to lead because you're not the loudest in the room, remember this truth. Your peace is your power. Your composure is your credibility. And your calm is your greatest contribution to a world that's forgotten how to breathe. That's the first pillar of silent influence. The power of composure. One of the most overlooked forms of power is the power to listen. Most people think influence comes from speaking well, but true influence comes from listening deeply. The world is full of people who want to be heard, but very few who are willing to hear. That's why the one who listens stands out like a light in the dark. Calm, patient, fully present. Listening is not a passive act. It's an active choice to put aside your ego, your opinions, your need to be right, and instead make room for someone else's truth. The best leaders understand this. They know that leadership isn't about always having the answers. It's about asking the right questions. There's an old saying, wisdom begins when we stop talking long enough to hear. That's where the introvert has an advantage. The quiet soul who doesn't rush to fill the silence, who allows space for others to speak, who listens not to reply, but to understand. That's a rare quality, and it's one that makes people feel valued. And when people feel valued, they become loyal. Most leaders try to command respect by talking, but the quiet leader earns it by listening. They understand that when people feel heard, they also feel seen. And when they feel seen, they naturally begin to trust. Trust, that's the soil in which influence grows. The truth is, we all crave understanding. Every employee, every student, every family member, every friend, they're all silently asking the same question: do you hear me? Do you see me? Do I matter? The leader who can answer that question with their attention alone never has to raise their voice. When you truly listen, you do more than gather information. You gather insight. You learn about fears, motivations, strengths, weaknesses, and dreams. You see beneath the surface of what people say, and once you understand what moves a person, you can lead them in ways words alone never could. Listening is also the key to wisdom. Jim Rohn often said that success leaves clues. But you can't find those clues if you're doing all the talking. You must be silent long enough to observe, to learn, to let life teach you. Quiet leaders know this. They approach every conversation with humility, asking, "What can I learn here?" There's a kind of humility that comes with true listening. Not the false humility of pretending to care, but the real kind that says, "Your experience matters." When people sense that, they open up. They tell you things they wouldn't tell anyone else. And in that trust, you gain the ability to lead them, not through authority, but through connection. The world doesn't need more speeches. It needs more ears. It doesn't need more experts. It needs more empathy. The ability to truly understand where someone is coming from. That's the mark of a mature leader. Because when you understand, you can guide. Most people miss this simple truth. Listening is not about staying quiet while you wait for your turn to speak. It's about entering someone else's world long enough to feel what they feel. It's about listening with your eyes, your heart, your silence. And silence, when used wisely, becomes a mirror. People see themselves more clearly in your quiet presence. That's why quiet leaders often inspire so deeply. They don't impose ideas. They draw them out. They help others discover their own strength, their own solutions, their own potential. Listening is leadership disguised as humility. And it's one of the most powerful tools you have if you're an introvert. Because in a world that constantly talks, your willingness to listen becomes a form of leadership all on its own. Let me give you a truth worth remembering. You cannot influence what you do not understand. You cannot guide people you don't take the time to know. So listen not just with your ears, but with your attention. When you're in conversation, be fully there. No distractions, no judgments, no internal rehearsals of what you'll say next. Just presence. That kind of presence is magnetic. It makes people feel safe, and people follow those who make them feel safe. When you listen deeply, something beautiful happens. People start to listen to you in return. They begin to value your words because they felt your attention. They know that when you speak, you're not speaking to be right, you're speaking to be real. That's the kind of influence that lasts a lifetime. Great leaders understand that words move minds, but listening moves hearts. Minds may forget, but hearts remember. The person who feels understood never forgets who gave them that gift. Even in silence, you can lead. Even in quietness, you can inspire. You don't have to be the loudest in the room. You just have to be the most attentive. Because attention, my friend, is love expressed through focus. And people bloom in the presence of that kind of love. So as a quiet leader, don't underestimate your ability to shape a team, a family, or even a generation through your listening. Every great movement started with someone who was willing to hear the cry of others. Listening turns awareness into action, and action into change. Now, make this practical. In your daily life, at work, at home, in your relationships, practice the art of deliberate listening. When someone speaks, don't rush to fix or respond. Ask questions like, "Tell me more," or "How did that make you feel?" Notice how people light up when they realize you're not waiting for your turn. You're truly listening. Over time, this practice turns into influence. People begin to seek your opinion because they trust your understanding. They'll say, "You always seem to know what's really going on?" That's not intuition. That's the fruit of deep listening. So remember, leadership isn't always about having the loudest message. Sometimes it's about having the deepest understanding. And understanding is born in silence. In a world obsessed with being heard, choose instead to hear. In a world racing to speak, choose to listen. Because when you do, you'll discover a truth that few ever realize, that the quiet ear often changes more lives than the loud voice ever could. That's the second pillar of silent influence, the power of listening. One of the greatest misunderstandings about leadership is that it requires a stage. That to influence others, you must be in the spotlight. But here's the truth. The most powerful form of leadership doesn't happen under bright lights. It happens in the quiet, unseen moments of discipline, integrity, and consistency. Real leadership is not a performance. It's a pattern. It's the pattern of how you live when no one's watching, how you act when no one's applauding, and how you respond when no one's agreeing. Those small private decisions, they're the foundation of public influence. For the introvert, this is where your natural strength shines brightest. Because while others are drawn to noise, you're drawn to depth. You think, you reflect, you prepare. You don't need to constantly announce your goals. You quietly work toward them. You don't compete for attention. You build credibility through consistency, and people, over time, notice. There's a certain power in the person who simply keeps showing up, the one who doesn't talk much about what they're going to do. They just do it, day after day, with quiet commitment. That's what separates noise from influence, talk from trust, leadership from performance. You see, people may doubt your words, but they can't doubt your example. They might ignore what you say, but they cannot ignore what you are. When you live your principles, you become a message, and that message speaks louder than any motivational speech ever could. In every organization, there's a person who doesn't say much, but everyone knows they're reliable. Everyone knows they can be trusted. Everyone watches how they carry themselves. That person may not have a title, but they lead nonetheless. Because leadership, at its core, is not a position, it's a posture. It's a way of standing in the world that says, you can count on me. The loud leader often relies on inspiration. The quiet leader relies on consistency. Inspiration can ignite for a day, but consistency sustains for a lifetime. And that's what true influence is, sustained inspiration born out of steady example. Let me tell you, people are always watching, not to judge, but to learn. They observe how you handle pressure, how you respond to criticism, how you treat people who can't help you. Every moment of your life sends a signal. The question is, what signal are you sending? The quiet leader sends a signal of steadiness. They don't get easily shaken by setbacks. They don't make promises they can't keep. They don't need to be the center of attention because they're centered within themselves. That kind of strength doesn't shout, but it shapes the culture around it. You might not realize it, but your calmness in chaos teaches others how to stay grounded. Your humility in success teaches others how to remain grateful. Your patience in delay teaches others how to trust the process. Without saying a word, your life becomes a classroom. That's why I often say, example is not the main thing in leadership, it's the only thing. You can preach values all day long, but if your behavior doesn't align, no one listens. The moment your example speaks, people remember. Leadership built on image will fade. Leadership built on example will last. Because people follow what they see, not what they hear. Introverts, by nature, are observant. You notice details others overlook. You think before you act. You prefer depth over display. That's not a disadvantage. That's a design. Because the more observant you are, the more intentional your actions become. And intentional actions build influence. You don't have to change your personality to lead. You just have to embody your principles so clearly that others can see them without a single word spoken. When you lead by example, you shift from inspiration to transformation. You stop trying to push people toward something, and instead, you pull them through your example. People start saying, they can stay calm, maybe I can too. If they can keep showing up, maybe I can try again. That's how silent influence works, quietly, consistently, deeply. The loud leader motivates others to act. The quiet leader teaches others how to act, through patience, through humility, through persistence. Now, consistency doesn't mean perfection. It means alignment. It means that even when you fail, you get back up with the same grace, the same humility, the same faith. It's not about being flawless. It's about being faithful. Because people don't follow perfection. They follow authenticity. They follow the person who's real enough to admit mistakes, humble enough to learn, and consistent enough to keep going. That's what builds trust. And trust is the foundation of every influence that lasts. Sometimes, the most powerful sermon is not spoken from a stage, but lived through a season of patience, a season of struggle, a season where you keep your integrity when it would be easier to quit. Those seasons teach more than any speech ever could. That's why I tell people, you're leading someone even when you don't realize it. Maybe it's your children, your coworkers, your friends, your community. Someone is watching how you live, how you handle disappointment, how you respond to success. They're learning from you, quietly, steadily, daily. The question is, what will they learn? Let them learn that leadership is not about noise, but about nobility. Not about fame, but about faithfulness. Not about control, but about character. You don't need the crowd's applause to validate your path. The results of your consistency will speak for you. Let your work be your voice. Let your character be your microphone. Let your consistency be your legacy. Because long after words are forgotten, example remains. The speech fades, the noise dies, but the influence of a life well lived endures. So keep walking your path, quietly, steadily, faithfully. You may not see the impact immediately, but make no mistake, the seeds you're planting through your example are taking root in the hearts of those around you. And one day, those seeds will grow into forests of influence. All because you led silently with integrity. That's the third pillar of silent influence. The power of example. The kind of leadership that doesn't need to shout because it speaks through character. The kind of influence that doesn't fade because it's built on truth. The kind of legacy that doesn't end when you stop talking because it lives on in those who watched you live.